Do what you can with what you've got where you are. Get good at failing.
I'm Andrew Brunswick. Nice to meet you, and thanks so much for taking the time with me.
Sure.
So I have a list of some questions here, if that's okay, and maybe we can start with those and we can discuss as necessary.
Okay.
All right. So first question here. I am an athlete and I have spent countless hours training my body, and public opinion seems to recognize that this is a healthy and attractive thing to do. There seem to be gyms on every street corner you go to. And my mind, at least from an education perspective, is well trained, college, medical school, neurosurgery training, but it hasn't done much formal training in terms of actual mindset training and being trained to respond to the challenges of life. I don't see mindset training gyms on every corner. The majority of people I know are not meditating or doing therapy. So the questions are, why do you think this is the case? And what does it really mean to train our minds? And how would we do that?
Should I give you neat and tidy, precise answers to your questions, or do you mind if I ramble a bit?
No, feel free to ramble, please.
Okay.
That's where the good stuff is.
Well, then let me ask you some questions. So you're an athlete. Have you been a competitive athlete?
Yes, I played baseball in college. And I was going to ask you later about baseball because for me, that's sort of the ultimate Stoic sport, but we'll get to that.
Well, it has a Stoic side. So I'm not sure. I haven't competed in a few years, partly because of COVID. So I'm not sure whether I should refer to myself as a competitive athlete. And maybe I'm a retired. But the interesting thing about sports is it has this whole other side. You're making yourself miserable in a way you don't have to be miserable. So I regard it as a kind of very important training. And you're running the risk of failure when you don't have to. You can just sit there on the couch and eat potato chips and watch other people fail. So I regard that as very important training. And you described mindset training. So there's a sense in which a gym is a kind of mindset training. You're going to go in there and you're going to do things you don't necessarily want to do. At some level you want to do, right? Because you want to get stronger and everything else. But there's just a price you have to pay to do it. I know I lift weights, not in a dramatic fashion, but I know my body is crinkly, for the next 2 days after I do. And then, so my wife will tell me about something in her body that hurts, and I try to be a supportive husband. So I start thinking about my own body, and I can come up with 14 different things that hurt. It's just, for me, that's just background, So that's one thing about sports and about working out and about training. It can change the way you approach the world. Most people avoid failure, and what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to put myself at risk just so I can get good at failing, which sounds like a loser's proposition. But the most successful people are people who are highly skilled at failing. They fail, they study their failure, they learn from their failure, they go on to make new, better failures until finally they reach, in some sense, what counts as success. Now, re-ask your question if you'd like.
Oh, sure. So I guess my training comes down to the fact that society in general seems to value things like physical training of the body and intellectual training of the mind in terms of knowledge. Okay. But there's not a lot of emphasis out there, at least in the public sphere, about mindset training, resiliency, the ability to deal with things like hedonic adaptation, those kinds of things. And how, I'm going to get to the doctor part later, but how would we go about starting off on that journey?
Okay, so I guess my little side trip there was that in these other things, it is mind training, mindset training, if you take it as a challenge and you throw yourself into the challenge, because you'll acquire skills at doing that. So it's an interesting question. Can you specifically do mindset training? Can you kind of just tease out that one element and say, well, that's what I'm working on. So it's not about getting a stronger body, or it's not about passing your MCAT or anything like that. It's a specific thing. And I suppose, sure you can. And the Stoics describe the way they do it. But the interesting thing to me is it spills over into other activities. these. So if you said, I want to become a meditation master, I would say, go meditate. If you said to me, I want to gain Stoic equanimity, I would say, go out in life and experience life. And while you're experiencing life, think about it, watch yourself, watch your role, and do some things that are going to make you uncomfortable as well. So I would say it's going to be hard to untangle. And think about the Stoic strategies. In my writings, I've described many of them. One of them is to imagine how things could be worse. It helps if you've seen how bad things are. In other words, there's an intersection with life where you've seen how bad things are. And then the trick is, yeah, but they could be worse even than they are. And it provides a valuable kind of mental insight. And it's also psychologically, I think, an effective tool to use. So what I'm saying is the question as you've asked it assumes there's a sort of separability there, and I'm not sure there is.
Interesting. Thank you. All right. The next question I wanted to ask, this is a question about discipline versus motivation. So to become a neurosurgeon and to maintain an excellent level of care, you have to be incredibly disciplined. And then you add to that having a family life, hobbies. It takes a lot of discipline to maintain all these things. And everyone always says discipline is the most important skill to have a successful life, and that discipline is freedom and all these things. And then we can't rely on motivation because motivation is fickle. Do you agree with this take on discipline versus motivation, or do you have a different framework?
I think I'm going to follow the same path as before and say that it's a blurry intersection. So there are things that I routinely do that puzzle the people around me. I write every day of the year, including my birthday, including Easter, which was yesterday. I write every day of the year. I row when I compete as a lightweight. That means there's a 160-pound weight limit. So I obviously cannot indulge myself on food because then I'll be competing against the big boys, and they will thoroughly trounce me. I get up at 4 a.m. All of these things sound like she must be really into that whole self-discipline thing. I don't feel that at all. I'm doing what I want to do. So there's that neat kind of Stoic repackaging. Sure, you can take something and say that I don't want to be doing this thing, but I got to force myself to do it. But there's another approach where you put yourself in a frame of mind where it's what you want to do. Now, I've had luck because I've got a life where I've made a good living figuring out what it is I wanted to do and then doing it. And there have been people, foolishly, who said, we'll pay you to do that, when in many cases I would have done it for free. So I'm not really good at self-discipline. And yet, from the outside, I looked like a highly disciplined individual. I have friends who are always talking me into, can't you come out and stay out later? Well, no, because I'll fall asleep. You'll have to transport me home under those circumstances. Then I'm going to turn a question around for you. And of course, you've got a schedule. You've got a schedule you've got to keep. And it's a schedule that requires you to be able to perform at a very high level on a few moments' notice. And I think that's one of the things we're going to discuss further. But at some level, you are doing what you want to be doing. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say that's correct in general, but not certainly at every moment. It carries over to other things in life. I would love to get up at 4 a.m. and go to the gym, but a lot of days I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like getting out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning when the pager goes off, but that I have to do. The gym thing I don't have to do. So for, I think, a lot of us, there's days where we just don't feel like it, but should we be relying on our willpower and discipline to overcome that I don't feel like it feeling, because the motivation goes up and down?
Oh yeah. Yesterday I was glad it was Easter yesterday, because that meant the gym was closed. And so normally I would have lifted, and so instead I didn't. And there are times when I will be up at 4 a.m. but be lying in bed for 10 or 15 minutes, sort of thinking it through. All right, so if I did get out of bed, what would I do next? So there's that, but you can rephrase the question I asked you a second ago as this. If your goal is to be a successful and technically accomplished neurosurgeon, and your goal is you want to help humans, and you do, you're through your practice of medicine, you do so at a profoundly high level. Is that what you want to do? So you've got like these big goals. I want to make a difference in the world. And then you've got these little goals. I want to sleep longer, right? Or I don't want somebody to wake me up at 2 in the morning. So you've got a clash of goals. They're both within your domain. Sometimes you'll have multiple competing goals, and that can be tricky. And then you've got to have your hierarchy of goals. And there would be some times when you said, well, I've got a calling, and the calling requires me to do the following. And so that's what I got to do. And after I've done it, then I do my best to make amends to the other disappointments I might have caused in doing that. So yeah, but again, I might not be the best person to ask. I mean, now I'm retired. Before I was a college professor, so I had a great deal of control over my days. Nobody ever called at 2 a.m. with an important philosophical question. I was keeping them awake, right? And so it could be that I've just had such a different experience that I can't give you any meaningful insights on that. But I mean, I'm working right now on a book. And so why am I writing it? Just been a real struggle to find somebody who would publish it. So why did I persist? Well, I want to make a difference in the world. And I know now that when you talk to publishers and tell them that, they think you're crazy. But it's what motivates me. And so do I regard the time I spend writing as time I could have been doing something else? No, it's my job. Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius has this whole thing about when he's lying in bed in the morning, it's just so comfortable and it's so warm and it's so cozy. Should he get out of bed? And what he tells himself is, he asks himself a question: is this what I was created to do? Lie here in bed and stay warm? Or do I have a bigger business? And this, in a kind of more technical way, is where Stoicism gets interesting. You find the Stoics always saying, no, they have a higher cause. And it isn't just to promote Stoicism, it's to help humanity. And so he drags himself out of bed. He says, yeah, I have a higher cause. This is great, but you know what? I'm here for a reason, and I got to go do what I got to do.
I love that. I really love that. I think I've seen that in your writings or conversations before. Okay. It's really helpful. Since we're on that topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about being on call as a neurosurgeon or as a doctor, because I think this is something that a lot of us struggle with, both physically from a exhaustion standpoint, but also mentally. And so the question is, it's mentally exhausting because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if you're going to have a peaceful night's sleep, relaxing, or if all of a sudden this little box is going to beep and then you're going to get in the middle of a 6-hour super high stress whirlwind. And so that often can lead to this baseline level of stress and anxiety. And sometimes I feel like, the coward that dies 1,000 deaths during this process. Is there a way that we can use Stoicism or Stoic insights to be more like the hero who just dies once and the rest of the time is kind of just at peace?
Okay, I've had a radically different life experience. Like I said, I would describe it as a very low stress lifestyle, never matters of life and death. And so again, you're asking the wrong fellow. But since you've asked me, let me chip in a few points here. I don't have any tattoos, but if I did get a tattoo, my tattoo would be the following saying. And I've tried to track down the source of this. I didn't come up with it, but it's do what you can with what you've got where you are. And that, in a nutshell, is the Stoic strategy for living. And so in your situation, it would be something like that. Will you be at 100% peak of your game all the time? No. How come? Because you're a human being, okay? And you're highly trained in everything else. But if you've gone 2 nights with broken sleep and then you get the 2 a.m. beeper goes off, then what is your goal? Is it perfection? Well, you can in some sense say your goal is always perfection. Okay, but as a human being, what do you have to say? You have to say, okay, here's what I've got. Here's where I am. Here's what I can do, because you're human. You're not a god. If you were a god, you could rise above that level, but you're a mere mortal, so you can't. So you do what you can with what you got where you are. Now, in this book project that I described, I've got a chapter on making decisions. I realized there was a Stoic kind of aspect to that. So usually we judge our decisions by their ultimate outcome. So in your case, was the patient playing violin again? X number of months later or not. This is a professional violinist, you had something going wrong, needed surgery. So you can judge it in those things. You can judge it by the ultimate outcome. The operation was a success, or that wasn't true. The operation was not a complete success, or in other cases, the operation was a failure. But the idea of evaluating decisions. So what I'm pushing for, and this is kind of the Stoic in me, it isn't a book about Stoicism, but Stoicism keeps creeping in through the back door, is the way to assess your decisions is not by their outcome, but with the test of, did you, under the circumstances you were in, make the best decision that you could, and then pursue that. So you will know before the patient has even woken up from surgery. By that standard, you will know whether it was a good decision. And the question you ask yourself is, okay, given what I had to work with, did I do the best I could? And what do you have to work with? A lot of times you don't have the 2 a.m. and it's your fourth night where you haven't slept through. That's one thing you got to work with. You might have limited information on the medical history of the patient. And so there are things you don't know. Well, you could take time to find them out, but time's is slipping away and this person needs help immediately. And then you can walk out of the operating room knowing, okay, given what I had to work with, that was a 100% performance. And if you find out at some later point that there's actually tragic consequences of this, as a mere human, you can't control the future. What can you do? You can do your best. So it's a different thing because in the business world, switching examples here, you make a business decision and it turns bad. People say he made a bad decision. Well, if we assume that the person is omniscient or omniscience is possible, but if he really did his homework and really came up, did the research and really, did whatever kind of consulting and really made a decision on the basis of those, a reasoned decision, and it turns out to be bad. Well, that's just because we live in an unpredictable world. So it was a great decision with unfortunate outcome. And I'm not sure in the medical world, the extent to which those are separated. I've heard cases where a doctor does something and it's in some sense the medically appropriate thing to do. There's some medication that he provides and that it has an ultimate bad outcome. And then the doctor in the future will shy away from using that medication again, because that will stick in the back of his mind. And he could be doing his patients a disservice through that. I mean, if medical science, they've done a lot of experiments, a lot of tests. This is the best. And so you go into it knowing that since every human being is different, there will be outliers, and you don't judge the medication by the outcome. I mean, in some broad sense, obviously you do. If it always fails, then you're crazy to be using it. And there's just that random element there.
I have a lot of things to say to that. But I think one thing that we all struggle with during training is that there's something called morbidity and mortality conference, where we all get together in a room and we it's the ultimate Monday morning quarterback, if you will, of the situation. And, we're all high achievers. We struggle, I think, with perfectionism. And this can be a very traumatic experience for us to be second guessed, to have bad outcomes reviewed. And I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with, is to be criticized, to be told that we're not doing a good job, that we're making mistakes. And so I was going to ask you that question, is kind of what mental tricks or frameworks can we use to help with that? But it sounds to me like you're saying process-oriented versus result-oriented is the most important thing.
Yes, that's a good way to capsulize it. And hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. And ego is always a factor when you're dealing with other people, and it's a factor when you're dealing with yourself. You have a front row seat to your life, to what goes on inside your head even, except your ego sometimes just stands in the way and blocks what you're seeing. So the idea of outside input is important because your ego doesn't directly block that. Your ego can actually come up with a convincing internal narrative so that you should have done what you did. And then an outsider will come and say, well, no, let's look at the medicine, let's look at the science, let's look at whatever. So that strange thing, an outsider can have a better view of what's going on in you than you can, because they don't have to deal with your ego. Now, the problem is they've got egos of their own and what they would love to do. And they come from this highly competitive background that you've described. I mean, to become a neurosurgeon, you have to be very self-assured and you have to be pushing. And so for them, that whole game, that's carried through. And there's a sense in which they're outside of medicine when they're doing that kind of, hindsight thing. What is it about? It's about trying to become the alpha male or alpha person in that particular thing. There are criticisms from outside that can be helpful criticisms. And then there's criticisms from outside. They aren't trying to help you. They're just trying to say, hey, world, I'm better than he is. And so you got to sort through the criticisms. Danger is that you'll sort too much and you'll start rejecting what other people are telling you. They can provide very valuable feedback because they don't have to deal with your ego. Lately, I've gotten this fascination with comedians and how they write their jokes. And what comedians crave is what are called notes. And that's when another comedian will give them a write-up of where their jokes are going wrong and where their jokes are going right. And a comedian would die to get those, because otherwise he has to do it. Stand up, trial and error, okay? So the notes from the outside are valuable resource, and yet the notes from outside are going to be contaminated. There's going to be some that are genuine, meant to be helpful, not even criticisms, but notes. You can put them in a different package. And then there's some that's just somebody grandstanding and say, hey, everybody, look at me. That guy's a fool. He made this mistake. I would never make that mistake. So I've never been to one of your meetings, but I've been to faculty meetings of various kinds and detected the same phenomenon.
Yeah, I imagine so. So there's no real way to sort out what's ego, chest thumping versus actual valuable stuff other than just intuition.
Yeah, intuition.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, there's a chance that you are doing that to others too. I've never seen you at one of these meetings, but see, that's what whenever I'm, out to criticize somebody else for what looks like a character flaw, I've learned always pause for a minute and think, how do they see me? How do they see me? You can also sense, you can read your own kind of motives there. If you look and probe, you can realize, why am I telling this person the following? Is it because I genuinely want to help them become better? Or is there something else lurking? And again, we can deceive ourselves about that. So it's a two-way thing. A watch for other people who are simply grandstanding at your expense, and watch your own self and see if you're ever doing that. So the process of doing that, you become more humble. I have other parts where I talk about some people's inability to admit that they've made a mistake. And that's a terrible situation to be in, because if you can't recognize your own mistakes, you can't learn from them. And so as a doctor, again, if you utter the phrase, I made a mistake, oops, lawsuits, oops, consequences, all sorts of things, which is terrible. Business world, same thing. Well, you're fired. We're going to hire somebody who doesn't make mistakes. But we all make mistakes. And it's an important part of the learning process.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. Now, I wanted to ask you about what Stoics would say about dealing with the unexpected, because I think we talked about this a little bit, but one of the hardest parts, if not the hardest part of neurosurgery, is just dealing with unexpected things that are going to happen, that you think you're going to go home and see your family, and all of a sudden somebody shows up in the emergency room and there's a complication, or you think you did a great surgery and the patient wakes up with a neurologic problem, or, you think you're going to get to go away for the weekend and then some disaster happens. And that manifests itself even in the moment. Have you heard of the Kubler-Ross kind of grieving process?
Yes.
Like denial, anger, bargaining, grief,
acceptance. I've heard that it's not based on science.
I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like, a lot of us go through a mini version of that: denial, anger, bargaining, grief, every time these unexpected things happen, and it's a big source of anxiety and stress. Are there any techniques that might be able to help us kind of be more at peace or deal with these unexpected things in a better way?
I've only got one trick for you. I'm not sure how well I mean, see, you're under, again, what I call stressful situation, multiply that by 10 and you've got what you would call a stressful situation. But so let's see, a week or two ago, it became clear that we back up our computers to the clouds in case they crash. It announced that, hey, we're full. We've got all your stuff. You're going to have to go up another level. So then started looking into it, realized that I needed to make an image, save an image of my computer so that if anything went wrong, I could do it. So I plugged in a drive in order to make the image. And in the process of doing it, knocked out my computer. How ironic is that? In the process of doing the thing that would let me deal with the situation causing that exact situation. So I'm working on that. And already I'm kind of thinking, this is an interesting test. Then my wife calls from the other room that her computer had gone out for a completely different reason. My initial reaction, so this is my Stoic training, was to tip my hat to the Stoic gods. I hadn't seen this wrinkle coming. And then it becomes this thing where it's this game. Now, I don't believe there actually are Stoic gods. It's a psychological kind of game. And just saying, oh, they just upped the stakes. And now, am I up to the task of doing that? So probably placebo effect, something else going on there. But we're talking about your mindset. We're talking about how your mind works. And your mind does work to this notion, does respond to this notion of you have the power to repackage what's happening to you. And you can just get angry. That's not going to help at all. But you can turn it into a kind of game. Now, again, so I've had a fair amount of luck doing that. I don't know if it would apply to your circumstances. Another thing, throw this in quickly, but a lot of religion, some people don't do what I'm doing and say there's these imaginary gods. They say there really is these gods. There are these gods or this God. And it's the same kind of process. By believing that, even if it's not true, by believing that, you can change your response to life's events.
Okay. So a lot of it is kind of the way we frame it or the narrative we come up with about the situation.
Yes. And in your case, think about you every day are writing the story of your life, and you want to be able to tell great stories. And some of those great stories are going to be the times you were in a difficult spot. My wife and I recently returned from an extended trip to New Zealand, and we were on this kind of small tour, and we were both COVID virgins, and we had self-isolated the whole month before the trip, and we were masked up during the plane flight and everything else. And on day 2 of a 21-day tour, we both got COVID. And then the interesting thing was, okay, the Stoic gods have lobbed this into our life, right? What are we going to do with it? And so what do? You do what you can with what you've got where you are. And so we kind of had to isolate for 5 days, and then we rejoined the tour. What do we come away with? Great story to tell, and while it was happening, I was thinking, I'm now creating paragraphs for that story, So it's that whole thing of repackaging your life. Bad things that happen to you, you can simply regard them as bad things. Or you can say, if I survive this, it's going to be a great story to tell.
Yeah, it's like you make yourself the hero in the middle of a great voyage or tale.
Yeah, and again, you can do it for public consumption, and I tell stories all the time. But you do it for public consumption, but for you to be the hero of your own life. That's the trick. You want to have a life worth living. You want to have a life when you look back on that life, you can say, did I do what I could with what I had where I was? And if you can say yes, not 100%, I had my off days, but to a remarkable extent, I did. And that's all you can do. So that counts as success.
Okay. I like it. I wanted to ask you about hedonic adaptation or the hedonic treadmill. I think this is something that we all struggle with. But in medicine, we have this dream to be a doctor. And the first big hurdle is getting into medical school. Wouldn't it be amazing if we got into medical school? And then we finally get into medical school, and that luster wears off pretty quickly. And, it's kind of a drag. And, we're the medical student, almost like we're a pet. And then we finally get into the residency that we wanted. And then, that's great for a while. And then we're the junior resident, and it's kind of a slog. slog and we're never sleeping. And we dream that someday we'll be the senior resident and everything will be better. And then that happens. And then we're kind of over being a resident. And then we want to be an attending doctor. And we finally make it there. And then we realize that we're at the bottom of the totem pole again. And then, life is stressful. There's a lot more responsibility. So we want to be this senior person. And then soon enough, we're kind of in the situation where, this is too stressful. I'm too old for this. I want to, find something else that's less stressful or retire or relax or whatever. So how would we deal with this mindset and try to just enjoy each step along the way without constantly yearning for something different or better?
Yeah, I'm torn in how I answer you. Number one is regular human being. I benefit from the medical expertise that is produced as a result of this process. I guess I've read some things suggest that, we don't have to have you up for 24 hours at a time, staying awake, going to things. There's other ways to teach doctors. I also read the doctor who said that's how you should do it was on amphetamines himself or something like that. I don't know. I might be making up stuff now, so be careful with this. So there might be ways that are less stressful to train people. But as I said, in different contexts, the weird thing about life is at any given moment in our life, we are living someone else's dream. So there are people who really wish that they could be living your life if you gave them a moment and informed them of the circumstances of my life too. So, I'm not a rock star or anything like that, but I have a fair amount of my health. I'm happy. I feel fulfilled. And there are people who are sick or who are addicted, or you go through the whole thing. And for them, if you approach them and said, okay, there's this old philosophy professor, and so here's the thing, flip this switch and you can have his life. A lot of people would say, yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, and that's certainly true of you, right? There are people who would say, if only I could be a doctor. Right? It's their dream. You're living their dream. And so at the same time as we're living someone else's dream, we go on to have a new dream of our own. And so it's this insidious process of, if only I could. So the trick is to learn how to have enough, to be able to say, I have enough. I've actually been quite lucky in life. I had parents who weren't abusive. I had a father who said, yeah, I'll send you to college. And it didn't have to be that way. So I'm really lucky to be where I am. I wasn't born with a speech impediment. You go through the whole list, I'm a lucky human being. So could I have more? Yeah. Do I actually work at getting more? Well, I suppose I have my investments and so on, but there's this other sense of, do I have enough? Yeah. Now, if you're a doctor and you say you have enough, then you don't go through. Yeah, there's the higher and higher levels of credentials. And then there's two reasons you can do that. One is you have a mission. And then it isn't simply that you're just insatiable. It's no. Here's the one thing. What is it? To do a whole bunch to help my fellow human beings. And along the way, I will be helped personally, but it will come at a significant price, but I'll be helping others. So, that whole notion, of course, this is probably delusional, but I'm quite easy to satisfy about a vast number of things. And I'm very quick to say, I have enough. This is good. I'm okay. You guys do what you need to do. I'll work around what you do. And I'm not boasting about that, but that just seems to be a thing. And I'm a very lucky person to have that state of mind. Because if you don't, then you're on that hedonic treadmill and you will never get off. Wherever you are, you will want more.
Right. Do you think, would the Stoics say that, focusing on gratitude is a big thing to do? Did they write and talk about gratitude as a way of kind of calming the desire for more and more?
Yeah. One tool is to think about how lucky you are to have everything you've got. And one way to do that is to think about losing the things that you've already got. Think about them being peeled away one at a time. I heard a story. I've reached a stage in life where I love to have conversations with complete strangers because they have always stories to tell. So I was at a hardware store looking for a particular screw, and the person who helped me was wearing a little brace on her wrist, and she was older. Then she said, yeah, and started telling me the story of that. And then I'm not sure if I can recount how the story drifted, but she told me the story of an uncle she had who had been a Korean War veteran, then was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, was told you have likely 2 years. He lived for 10 years, 10 years beyond the 2 years. And So she used to say she'd go visit him, and the very first thing he would ask is, could she please scratch his nose? Because he was incapable of doing it for himself, and whoever was supposed to help him, they were gone. But imagine, and so you get to that level of so many things you can take for granted. The ability to scratch your nose when it itches can go away. Once you get into that frame of mind, you'll realize this is an incredible world. I'm incredibly lucky. There is so much I could lose that I take utterly for granted. And then you start getting into that mindset of being thankful for what you've already got. And that makes it a little bit easier. Kind of put your heels in on that hedonic treadmill and say, you know what? Yeah, guess what? If I get more, I'll still be at the same stage. So instead, take that energy, that drive to appreciate the things I've already got, because there's just millions of them and I take them utterly for granted.
Got it. Thank you. A little bit on that note, I wanted to ask about when we study mindfulness, we always are told, be in the moment, be present. There's, only now, there's no future, there's no past, things like that. When we're in training as residents, it can be hard to be grateful. It can be hard to think this way because life is really, really challenging. And we know that there is this time in the future where in theory, life will be better when we're the boss and we're not, working 100 hours a week. As people who are in training, is there a way to think about this and to still be kind of present in the moment and enjoying life, even though the temptation is to say, I just got to get through right now and then things will be better later?
Okay, so you asked actually a few questions here. So let me unpack some of them. One is you can't stay in the moment. I mean, people hold that up as the ideal thing. You are programmed not to stay in the moment because your ancestors on the savannas of Africa who did, who were sitting on a rock meditating. It's a beautiful moment. Got eaten by a lion or something. I don't know. You pick your animal, but did not survive. But the ancestors who were constantly thinking about the future and constantly thinking about the past. Who has slighted me lately? Who is rising in the hierarchy? And how can I prevent that? And where did we find that water? So we are programmed to live in the future and the past for evolutionary reasons. I know when I'm awake at 2 a.m., tossing and turning, that's where my thoughts go. And each night, I know what's going on. That's a frustrating thing. And they go to the future. Oh, here's a project I got to do. How can I do it? And they go to the past, conversations I've had and so on. To stay in the moment so I can fall asleep, it can be tricky. So that was one aspect of that. Now, the other thing about you just thinking, please rephrase that part of the question for me. So you're saying that as a doctor, you have these long hours and...
Well, so there's kind of different phases of your career. There's residency when life is miserable. And then there's, when you finish and you're an attending doctor where theoretically life is better. And so for the residents out there, how can they try to enjoy life now and be present in the moment and be grateful for everything they have when the temptation is just to say, life sucks right now. I just got to get through these few years and survive them, forget about enjoying them. And then, my whole thought process is focusing on this future pot of gold where everything's going to be better.
Yeah. So it's going to be tricky to do. I mean, my first thing is learn how to appreciate what you've already got and realize you've got a lot. Interesting thing would be to compare the stresses you're under that you've been describing with the stresses on field of battle when you're out in war, because there, a whole bunch of these stresses, plus the fact that you might die any moment. And that isn't the case with you in doing surgery. It's not like you have to worry about some guy creeping up behind you and hitting you on the head or something. Hope not. Hope that's not the case.
Not yet.
So they are your level of stress plus a whole nother element there. And then of course they come out of it with post-traumatic stress disorders in many cases, understandably, I guess, because of what they've gone through. One thing is this realization, number one, I'm helping somebody in a very important way. I'm possibly saving a life. If I do my job to the best of my ability, I'm at least making a huge difference in the quality of somebody's life. And unfortunately, we live in a world with physical limitations. I'm not a god. I can't just put my hand on his forehead and heal him. So there's just this stuff I got to go through in order to achieve that goal. And I got to do it knowing that I'm just a human, meaning that there are limits, and I've got to do what I can with what I've got where I am. Now, at the same time, you talk about burnout. I imagine that I've never been in the military. I had the luck of the draw. I got a great number in 1970. They still did the draft. So so would have been a different person, had I gone out. But that whole notion of I gotta survive another day. It's hard to imagine. I guess you could do it. And Marcus Aurelius went off with his soldiers and he was on, I don't know if he was engaged in hand-to-hand combat, but he had that difficult life. So here, I'm wandering here. So let me get back.
No, this is good.
So that whole notion about appreciating the importance of what you're doing, recognizing it and saying, you know what, this is a sacrifice I'm making, but it's for a far, far greater good. And I got to realize that. Went up to somebody in the street and said, okay, so suppose this afternoon you could do something that would save somebody's life. Would you do it? What would I have to do? Would I have to give my heart as... No. You have to do something very carefully and you're going to have to practice in order to do it very carefully. Would you do it? Well, yeah, because it would be saving someone's life. Well, you're there. You're in the spotlight at that particular moment. And, there's the question of the rest of the world notice and care. That's a factor, but you care. And I think it must be just absolutely thrilling for you later to encounter a patient and be able to say, you shouldn't say it out loud, but he wouldn't be here or he wouldn't be functional. I occasionally encounter former students. I didn't save their lives, but they will tell me things that I told them 30 years ago. And I'll think, oh, I did not realize. So, but yeah, there's a lot of tough stuff you got to go through to get there. But that's your mission. And you chose that mission.
And I also think that, maybe you did save a few of those people's lives, maybe not literally, but at least, from a decision-making standpoint or
writings that I do. I mean, I get a steady inflow of messages and, just the idea that I made a difference because that's what I set out to do. Did I sell a gazillion copies? No, but that wasn't the point. The point was to make a difference. And it's a very, very rewarding thing.
You mentioned burnout, which is something that I wanted to touch on as well. I think from a surgeon standpoint, we often have these reputations as being kind of angry, detached, lacking empathy, things like that. My theory on that is that it's because it's a defense mechanism. Otherwise, if we get too close to a patient, if we get too engaged, we feel vulnerable. And if something bad happens, and we all have bad things that happen, it can be a really hard psychic blow to endure. So we kind of detach and we have compassion fatigue, which is a little bit different. But is there a way that we can try to stay engaged without resorting to these other unhealthy defense mechanisms that you know of?
Okay, so again, you're in a different field than I am. Perhaps this is parallel and maybe not, but let me give it a run. I had a reputation as a tough grader. How come? Because I knew things I could do that what they needed was an honest assessment of their abilities. So I was a tough grader. There would be cases where I could see, oh, this student is going to pay a price because they missed a lot of class and so on and so on. And I had a choice. I want to sympathize and say, you poor thing. Or do I want to sort of say, well, here's where the line is drawn. And so I routinely said, here's where the line is drawn. Now, did I suffer for that? There are times when I felt mean. But I knew that as soon as I started thinking, I'm here to make the students happy as opposed to teaching the students, that it would be game over. Because I know how to do that. You just give A's to everybody and you got the happiest group. Now, back to medicine. So there's a sense in which you want to be empathetic, but I absolutely agree that there's such a thing as too much and that keeping a distance between you and the patient. So things can go wrong and you will pay a personal emotional price when they do. So let's see the difference between sympathy and empathy. So one thing, when somebody comes up to me and tells me about something bad that's happened to them, I used to say, I know how that must feel. I now say, I have no idea at all what that must feel like, but you have my sympathy. But I really don't know what you're feeling because I've never gone through anything like that. But you have my sympathy. I wish you well. Is there something I can do to help you? And I think I'm drifted clear from medicine here, because in medicine, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, if you're too emotionally involved with a patient, you're going to start making bad decisions regarding that patient. And afterwards, if things go wrong, you're going to beat yourself up because they went wrong. Is that basically?
Yeah, I think both of those are true.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any other insights because, again, I live in a different world.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, the whole burnout thing. And again, I never felt burned out in the classroom. I mean, it's a challenge, but it's a completely different game. What you're doing is not a game.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the insights. You've kind of gotten a sense of some of the struggles that we have in our field, at least mentally. Given all that, do you have any kind of suggestions on either specific types of meditations or a specific type of curriculum that, we could pursue if we were interested in Stoicism and using that to help us with some of these challenges?
So the Stoics were philosophers, but they did other things. They were also the preeminent logicians, first century AD. They developed propositional logic, which is the kind they use in cell phones and computers. So you could, at a stretch, say they invented computers. It's a stretch, but I'm going to go with it anyway. They were also, did a number of very accomplished individuals. And they were also, I would say, the preeminent psychologists of the first century AD. Some of their insights weren't rediscovered by people like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Kahneman passed away just a few days ago, but this was late in the 20th century, came up, rediscovered these things like what we were talking about before, like framing. You may not have control over what the world does to you, but you have control over how you frame it. And that control can make a profound difference in the quality of your life. So they developed these specific psychological strategies. So it had nothing to do with religion. It had nothing even to do with philosophy. They were just psychologists, and they were kind of saying, here's something that we think should work. And I think we touched on some of them, like one called negative visualization, where you spend time actively thinking about how things could be worse. You don't dwell on it because that's a recipe for depression or a symptom of depression. And all it takes is a few seconds, and you say, things could be worse. And someplace I said this, and this would tie in with your profession in particular, about, if somebody challenged me and said, well, what about this? Guys being wheeled into the operating room for brain surgery. How could that person be worse? And then the quick, smart alecky Stoic responses could have been inoperable. That whole business thinking about that. And that's only one of many Stoic strategies. So I described the specific strategies in 2 books. A Guide to the Good Life is the first, and Stoic Challenge is second. I also did, for Sam Harris's Waking Up app, I did a series of talks on Stoicism, where these are like 10 to 15 minute talks in which I pick off specific things and describe the Stoic psychological strategy. So there are other ones, like one is imagining prospective retrospection, which is a terrible name, but it's right now. You imagine how this moment will look down the road in your life. So you're there in the surgery room, and you've got 4 different people calling out different things, that need your attention, and you're on top of it. And then just in the corner of your mind, that last little 2 neurons that aren't currently engaged in all the rest, just, there will come a day when I will look back on this very moment and I will say, man, I was atop my game. That can actually help you stay atop your game when you're doing it. But it's just that notion of, look at the mental and physical resources I have in order to be able to do what I'm doing. There's another strategy is where you imagine yourself seeing your life from the point of view of somebody else, and you realize you're living the dream, and yet you foolishly have your own dream which says, not there yet. So there's a bunch of them. And again, it's not a religion. It's compatible with any number of religions, and it can be quite useful in your life. And you don't have to go away and study in a monastery for half a year or whatever. On the course of a weekend, by reading some of this stuff or listening to some of these, you will come away with a real clear understanding of whether it's going to make a difference in your life or not. And if it is, easy to learn, easy to practice. And if not, hey, you just spend a few hours reading something, and at small price to pay in the course of a lifetime.
Thank you. I've listened to all of your Waking Up talks, and I love all of them. I've listened to them a few times, actually. So I found them to all be very helpful. So thank you for that. I just want to see if there was anything else I wanted to hit. We might have talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about. So here's one other question I had, which is, I'm not sure if this applies in any way to Stoicism, but, I've had complications in surgery, patients that didn't do well. And afterwards, I sit there and I think, if only I had studied harder, if only I had spent more time reading or in the lab practicing or done more, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. And those thoughts are obviously a burden. But on the other hand, I have to have a life and a family and hobbies and things like that. Sometimes it feels like every minute I spend doing those other things is a minute that I'm not being as good as I could be or putting somebody at risk. Is there any way to deal with those thoughts that you can think of?
Yep. Again, the problem is you're a mere human being. So you have limits on every aspect of your life. And so what you've hit on is what I refer to as the line drawing problem. So to successfully go through life, you have to draw arbitrary lines. And wherever you draw the line, there will always be somebody who says, well, why not 1 inch this way? Or why not 1 inch the other way? And wherever you draw it, they will be able to say that. And you have to realize that can't be the test, merely that you could have done differently. So as a conscious thing, you draw the lines. And in your case, you said, if I'd read something more, if I had done something different, suppose you sort of say, I'm going to devote every waking hour when I'm not in surgery studying harder. That's not going to work for you. You talk about burnout, it'll be very quick burnout. And, whatever relationships you've got going in your life are going to have disastrous consequences. So you draw the line and you say, well, here's what I'm good for. I mean, I find in my writing, one thing that happens is if I have unlimited time to fix things, to edit, to make little small changes, I will consume as much time as I've got. There's this old saying that the job expands to fit the room, the time available to do it in. That whole notion of there will always be what ifs. That's just the human condition. There will always be, what if I had done so on and so on and so on. So think about your life. Think about all the decisions that if you had made them differently, the consequences they would have had subsequently. So our life hinges on a bunch of these weird contingencies. So you go around saying, what if? Or you can go around saying, well, whatever. Here's where I am. What can I do where I am now, given what I've got? So that notion of drawing a line, and that says, what I'm going to do is draw a line. Here's how much time I'm going to devote to this talent I've acquired and want to improve. And then that's it. And you can say, well, why not more? And there'll be that internal part of your brain that's saying, if only. And that voice will wake up when you're trying to fall asleep at 2 a.m. after the buzzer going off or whatever. And you've just got to tell it to shut up. You drew your line, and it'll also, the time when you are kind of really studying and trying to improve, you'll be able to put 100% into that, as opposed to putting in 40% and then checking your email and then another 20% and then checking your email. You just say, here's my limits. So for me, writing, I told you I write every day. Ideally, I write 4 hours a day, and writing is ongoing problem solving. Choice of what's the next word, what's the structure, where do the paragraphs go? And I find after 2 hours, I am pretty tired, need to do something else, and then I try a second 2-hour session. And it's the most productive way I can do it. Because if I gave myself 8 hours, I would be in a constantly distracted state. I would read something, I would be writing something, and I'd think, I wonder what Google has to say about that. So give me 8 hours, and I wouldn't get as much done as I do in shorter sessions. That's a thought, is just say, I've got my limits, and in terms of time, and yes, someone can challenge them and say you could have done more or you should have done less. And it's arbitrary, but that's how life is.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I feel better already.
Good.
2 last questions, if that's okay. The first one is, again, I'm not sure if you're going to have thoughts on this, but there's a lot of, out in social media, there's a lot of talk about discipline, a lot of talk about it from, people who are like ex-Navy SEAL type people who are very discipline, and it's so important. And I've listened to those talks and I've gone down those discipline paths before. And the problem I've run into is that I get in this mindset where I become almost like inhuman. I'm getting so much done and I'm waking up and at insane hours and exercising, and it's great. But then when it's time to connect with my wife or a human being or be emotionally available or vulnerable, it's like I'm in robot accomplish mode and I can't do that. Is there any way that we can be both disciplined but also kind of emotionally available and vulnerable and able to connect with people?
So we talked earlier about discipline thing. I mean, here's another kind of example. So the people I know go on various diets, and I never diet. I told you I have a 160-pound weight limit. How do I do that? I don't diet, I lifestyle. What is lifestyle? Well, it's a whole bunch of choices about how do I want to live. So portion portion control, choice of foods, but dieting requires discipline. And that's why dieting usually doesn't last. It lasts for a while. So you got to put yourself in a situation where you're doing what you want to do. You're doing it because it's what you want to be doing. You're not doing it because you're forced by some external power to do it. It's what you want to do. Now, what if all you want to do is watch cartoons or watch kitty videos on YouTube? Well, I don't know, because I'm not at that state. And the people who are, the people on SEAL Team 6 are indeed driven individuals. And then the interesting thing is, if somebody said to you, okay, here's this switch we can flip, you can live their life. Would you want to do it? Think about it. You would be a hero in the eyes of many people, and you would have this steely self-discipline and so on. Would you want to do it? Gosh, I'd have to give up a lot to do that, wouldn't I? But no, because I want kind of a balanced existence. I want during the moments of the day, I want it to feel like, gosh, I'm doing something that I find, profitable. I'm doing something enjoyable, something that I enjoy, something that can make a difference. So I don't want to be robotic. So that whole discipline thing. And again, you got where you are. I suppose it was a mixture of discipline, but it's also you were doing what you wanted to be doing, and good for you. So it raises a deeper question of, well, how do you get people to want to do things that they should be doing? And that's a tougher thing. That's the motivation question, which is different than the discipline question, because once the motivation exists, it kind of takes care of itself.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. Last question. Thank you. So I've heard you talk about inoculating yourself to discomfort before. Yep. And so, I wanted to ask you just specifically, I'm not sure if you've ever tried or heard of cold plunging. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm curious if the Stoics would have a take on cold plunging, in terms of just its ability to maybe mentally make you stronger or, expand your tolerance for discomfort, things like that, whatever you have to say about that.
Okay. I've never cold plunged. I don't plan to cold plunge. I have Stoic friends who take cold showers. I don't take cold showers because I do something that I find even harder to do. And let me just throw in a public safety announcement here. I'm a rower, competitive rower. And so we're in early spring, the water is still quite cold, and we have people going out and rowing. And I try to convince them that it's just not a good idea. In rowing, they're tippy boats, and they tip when you least expect it. And if you're in the water and cold, that you're going to do the gasp reflex, you're going to be drowning before you barely even know you're in the water. So that would be like a cold water plunge. And I keep trying to tell people, don't do that. Do they listen to me? No, I'm just a philosopher. I don't know. But the other part of the cold plunge is it's a one moment kind of steely will to do something. I've got something better to do. So when I'm not out rowing in the spring, in fact, this morning, I was not out rowing. I could have been physically. I was erging with some friends. So the erg is the rowing machine, and we were doing interval training. And we were doing one drill. It's 2 minutes where you're driving hard, and then you get 3.5 minutes of rest, and then you do it again. So here's what's hard, and that is over a course of 2 minutes, keep the output up, and then rest, and then do it again. And, oh, by the way, you'll also build your endurance. You'll build your VO2 max. You'll do all of these other things as a side thing. So there's a sense in which doing the plunge is the easy way out. It's a one-time thing, and then you can say, see, I did it. And during a race, so if you're a competitor, here's a real super challenge, and that is you are dog tired. You are exhausted, and there will be those voices in the back of your head that are saying in the most enticing way, Bill, you could quit. You could just quit. You could stop rowing. And just dealing with those voices, and it'll be the last quarter. If you're in a typical rowing race, the last quarter of the race, they're there. So you've got a double thing. You've got to ward off these voices and tell them to just shut up and keep taking one more stroke. So I'd say if what you wanted to do is better than building self-discipline is just this kind of wrestling. So you aren't using discipline, but you're wrestling these forces with these forces that are coming out to make you a less good you than you are. And so this whole notion of doing things that make you uncomfortable, you can do things that make you physically uncomfortable. Better still, do things that make you mentally uncomfortable. Try doing something really hard to do. You'll be mentally uncomfortable. You might fail. Big deal. You'll get better at failing, and that can make you successful in the future. I do do things that are going to make these voices appear in my head so I can get practice wrestling them to the ground and driving a stake through their heart. That's a dramatic way to put it, because otherwise they're going to take control of my life. And once I stop, once I listen to them, they say, oh, he listened. I wonder what other areas of life he will listen to us too. So it strengthens them. So that would be my take on it. So I'm not a big fan on self-discipline. I'm a big fan on you having a mission for your life so that you want to be doing things that you're required to be doing. Maybe this is true with the elite SEAL team, 6 people, and theirs is what, duty to country. So that could be.
Awesome. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. I think that's all I have question-wise. I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate your time too. I've had a great conversation with you, and I appreciate your efforts on behalf of mankind in surgery.
Well, thank you very much. Last, not real question, but is there anyone else that you think that would come to mind that, would be good for me to talk to that, about all the questions I've been asking? Is there anyone else you can think of that'd be a good person to have something like this with?
There's a ton of Stoics out there. I can't think of one. I think you came to the right one. Let me put it that. So Stoicism is having this renaissance, and there's just a ton of stuff being done. I mean, an interesting question is whether there is somebody in a kind of a different discipline. Nothing's coming to me off the top of my head. I'll let you know if any ideas do come up.
I listened to that Waking Up podcast. One of the people on there who I've admired is, I don't know if you know who he is, Joseph Goldstein.
I know of him.
Yeah. No, he seems to be not Stoic. It's a different kind of take on things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm just giving you, hey, here's one way.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about our world is there are going to be multiple paths to the same objective. So he might be a candidate. I don't know how busy he is, and I don't know how receptive he is. But
right, yeah.
Worth a try. What's the worst that happens? He says, that's it. You failed. You go on to
fail better. Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure.
And enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks. Take care.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.